It's very frustrating to see that so much money has been wasted and so much time on legal actions.
Sally Bethea, founding director of Upper Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, shares the sentiments of many in Georgia.
This is the first time a federal judge has ordered the 3 states to come to an agreement in some fashion, resolve the matter, or he has said that the Corps of Engineers must revert to the way they operated Buford Dam at Lake Lanier in the 1970s.
That would mean the Corps would have to decrease the amount of water it releases from Buford Dam, and Metro Atlanta would have to drastically reduce the amount of water it withdraws from both Lake Lanier and the Chattahoochee River. Many state and business leaders say that would put the brakes on future growth in the region. Parties contend that the Army Corps of Engineers violated Section 301 of the 1958 Water Supply Act. That act requires the Corps to get Congress's approval for major changes in the way it operates federal dams. Atlanta Regional Commission Director Chick Crowler says that Georgia tried to follow the rules.
We asked the Corps to do the studies necessary to seek congressional authorization, and that's what triggered the original lawsuit from Alabama.
The Army Corps of Engineers manages Buford Dam and Lake Lanier. The Corps controls flows from the dam to the hydroelectric turbines and into the Chattahoochee River. That river runs past the city of Atlanta, through South Georgia, and downstream into Florida and Alabama. Court documents state that during the initial phases of the dam, the Corps did not anticipate water supply withdrawals from the lake, but that's something that quickly changed. When Lake Lanier was created, it submerged the water pumping station that the city of Gainesville had built on the Chattahoochee River. So in 1953, the Corps reimbursed the city in part by allowing it to withdraw 8 million gallons a day from the lake. Shortly after, Gwinnett County asked the Corps for permission to withdraw drinking water. The Corps initially rejected the request, citing the project's original purposes. But in 1956, Congress gave the Corps permission to let Gwinnett County use roughly 3.6 billion gallons a year. This authorization, however, was only to be for a period of 50 years. No contract was ever drafted between the Corps and Gwinnett County until the early 1970s. The city of Atlanta draws its drinking water from the Chattahoochee River. So does DeKalb County. The Corps regulated releases only to ensure that enough flow was maintained for an increased water supply for Atlanta and to increase hydroelectric production at power plants downstream.
The fact that the Corps has allowed us to take more water out of Lake Lanier as we've needed it was a clear indication from us that they had the authority to allow us to do that.
As Metro Atlanta's withdrawals grew, the Corps had to reallocate storage in the lake for water supply. To accommodate the city of Atlanta's water needs, the Corps increased dam outflows on the weekends, which are considered non-peak power periods. That, along with the water storage contracts, led to a flurry of lawsuits from Alabama, Florida, and a consortium of cities that buy Buford Dam's hydropower.
The state of Alabama, in one of its court filings, said very clearly that the Corps needed to update the operating manual. At the same time, one of the senators from Alabama was threatening to withhold the Corps' budget if they spend any money updating the operating manual. So they're caught in a political bind that's been very difficult for them.
But the question before the court was straightforward. Did the Army Corps of Engineers overstep its authority in letting Atlanta withdraw water from Lake Lanier? Environmental law expert Craig Pendergrass says yes.
But did the Corps of Engineers overstep its bounds in terms of providing water to a riparian user under common law? I don't know if that's the case.
Riparian rights basically say that if a person owns property adjacent to a stream or river, then he or she has a right to reasonable use of the water that runs by it.
And reasonably means you need to be good stewards of that water. You need to not have excessive demands on it.
The water that's in the river is Georgia water that begins in a river in North Georgia, flows through Georgia, and has nothing to do with the operation of the lake. We have every right to withdraw water out of the river up to the amount of the permit that's authorized by the state.
Just because a river starts in one state does not give that state carte blanche to take as much water as they want or misuse the resource. The whole idea of riparian rights is you leave enough in the stream for your neighbor to make reasonable use of the water as well.
Alabama says that its Farley nuclear plant is not getting the sufficient amount of water needed for properly cooling the waste heat discharge. And in a September 2009 interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Florida Environmental Protection Department Secretary Michael Soule said that the low inflows are making fish less available and disrupting the salinity of the estuary in the Apalachicola Bay. He goes on to say that Florida is in court to get protection for the Apalachicola ecosystem. An ecosystem, the agency says, that is vital to the multi-million-dollar commercial fishing industry in the bay. Sally Bethay says damage from Metro Atlanta's withdrawals isn't limited to other states.
There are environmental and water quality issues here in Georgia, in our river system on the Chattahoochee and also the Flint, because Metro Atlanta is withdrawing huge amounts of water out of these rivers and not returning all that water.
That's really an inaccurate argument.
Chick Crowler says those claims overlook the fact that Atlanta returns to the river 60 to 65% of the water it takes out.
We put water back that's actually cleaner than what we take out, and we put a very high percentage of the water back. Under the Corps' regulations, they're not allowed to recognize return flows.
And Crowler contends the problem is far bigger than Atlanta.
If Atlanta didn't exist today, the flow at the Florida line would be increased by 2%. So we're not using a tremendous amount of water in the whole basin. In fact, the amount of water that's in Lake Lanier is only 5 or 6% of all the water that's in the basin. What Florida gets is what Florida is going to get, because 95 or 96% of all the water that ultimately gets to Florida falls below Lake Lanier.
But officials in the state of Florida say that has no bearing on the argument. A statement from Secretary Soule's office reads, "This case is not about water supply last year, today, or tomorrow. It's about the long-term impact of the Corps' operation during times of drought. Even in times of abundant water, the Corps must operate as Congress intended." And though Alabama considers its water needs as environmentally vital, Gil Rogers says that the state's prosperity is fundamental to the dispute.
I would think that the communities in Alabama that are on these shared river systems would say that they have every much of a right to grow now and in the future and make use of the water that's coming down. So riparian rights don't look always at present uses of water, but future uses as well.
Next, what's the worst that could happen? The Southeast finds out as a multi-year drought drains the disputed lake. Reporting from Atlanta, I'm Sean Shepard, Clean Skies News.